Francesco, welcome to what we're now calling Calandra Corner. It's a new a version, new program with italics. And so the people know who you are. You're Francesco Ricatti. You're coming to us from Australia. You're a professor of Italian and Italian diaspora studies at Monash University. And we both had the same reaction to a new book entitled The Penguin Book of Migration Literature, Departures, Arrivals, Generations, and Returns, with a foreword by Vijay Dantakot, an introduction, and edited by Dora Ahmad. I posted on Facebook my reaction to it because I felt that a book that was going to span late 18th century to current day, with 32 essays dealing with, and they're sort of, some of them are personal essays, some of them are still a little bit analytical, whatever, that are supposed to deal with migration. There's nothing that refers to Italy. And my first reaction was, here we go again.
Yes, Anthony, and thank you for having me in this lovely corner of your very important institute. Yes, I had the same reaction. It's something that I think all scholars of Italian migration in different fields, I'm mostly an historian, have experienced over and over again. Where are the Italians? Such an important, historical phenomenon in the past 150 years, not just for Italy and not just for the USA, but for the world, really, with, 25 to 30 million migration and, very significant phenomenon, which has also produced amazing art and literature and culture, and yet somehow is too often ignored.
It is, and that seems that's the puzzle, right? That's the sort of bewildering phenomenon that two things, right, about Italy that I always say. Number one, my formation in Italian studies is modern and contemporary. However, I go back to the Middle Ages when we're dealing with Italy on a worldwide scale, because Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio, there's no Shakespeare, there's no English sonnet, there's no, right? I mean, the epic poem after 1000, it's Dante. Early prose, short stories, writing, etc., it's Boccaccio, and so on and so forth. So here we have that, and then of course the other issue, as you said, close anywhere between 28 to 30 million people left Italy in this 120-year span of time, and yet when these worldwide discussions happen, contextualized in a very broad, Italy always seems to be left out. Always seems to be left out. So I wonder this, and you're in Australia. The migration to Australia is younger, right, than it is for the most part. I mean, there were Italians in Australia at the turn of the 20th century, whatever. But the bulk of and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems the bulk of migration to Australia was post World War II. Right. Sort of like Canada also, I think we can say. Here instead, it was, of course, turn of the 20th century, 1880, 1920, 1924, when the Immigration Act basically closed the doors. And so I wonder if perhaps it's a little bit not our fault in that we don't push enough, that maybe there was this because in as you know, having studied also migration to the United States, Italians were very much low on the totem pole, right? We know all those advertisements for jobs, no colors or Italians need apply, and so on and so forth. So I wonder if there wasn't a type of reaction where the children of the immigrants didn't really take that interest in the culture. And then, of course, there were issues of class and things of that sort. That's the way we sort of look at it in a very general sense, I think, in the United States, right? I don't know how about Australia, if it's sort of the same.
Well, my take on Australia is that, first of all, Italians have always had this in-between position, not really enough white and not enough black in a sense. So in systems that tends to, focus most of the political and cultural discussion around this very rigid racial dichotomy, it's always difficult to fit Italians. And I think that's one of the problems. Another problem is that a lot of Italians have tried to whiten over the years and over the generations, and as a consequence they have somehow forgotten or rewritten what was the working class racially ambiguous history of migration, which is precisely what makes it so interesting, I think. This is an amazing class war by working class and peasant, but it's done through migration, and that's what makes it one of the most interesting phenomena, I think, of the late 18th century and then the late 19th century and then 20th century. But that also means that a lot of Italian communities, and especially I would say the self-appointed leaders of these communities, don't feel very comfortable to engage with that story. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there is Italy, and Italy tends to be ashamed of its migration history as well. And you constantly see that when, if you tell them, how can you be against migration? How can you be so insensitive to the rights of migrants and refugees when Italy has this incredible history of migration? Many tells you we were different. And of course, we were not different. And you can only say that if you actually are ashamed of what we were, and in part still are. And so when you bring all these three elements together, I think there is very little space left in the public arena, in the public debate, to recognize how amazing this history is, and also the amazing literary and artistic and cultural productions that have emerged from this history. Somehow these histories and these works of cultures don't easily fit in this sort of dichotomies that seems to dominate the public debate.
Yeah, I agree with you totally, and I do want to let our viewers know that you've actually published a book on the Italians of Australia recently with Palgrave, and so it's available all over, and people can easily get it from Amazon. So they know, they go to Amazon, Ricatti, Italians in Australia, and bingo, your book comes up. So just so they know, and they can get an idea. And actually, and what'll be interesting is that it's very similar to what we see here, and of course, for me, the similarity is whether it's here, whether it's Australia, whether it's Canada, whether it's South Africa, it's an Anglophone culture, right, in which the Italians have to insert themselves, whatever. But your reading, I think, I agree with it 100%. And I think what happens is therefore, as a consequence, is that we don't fight for space then in these books. But we don't even realize we should be in these books in some ways, right? And so while we on Facebook, you and I, and one or two other people sort of took apart for Dora Ahmad, and she very, very, very well defended herself, I think, as best she could. But I think, so what happens is the Dora Ahmads and the other editors of books like this don't know about us. In a way, right?
Yeah,
we're not out there pushing our culture. It's true. It's such a rich culture, that the Italian immigrant or the children of immigrants or the grandchildren here, of course, we're talking third, fourth, and fifth generation, have contributed to the cultural world of the United States, for example. And as we know, they are contributing also to the cultural world of Australia. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you know, I felt almost guilty to somehow criticize the book on Facebook because, as I wrote to the editor as well, I think, you know, this is an important book. This kind of book is on our side of the fence, you know, it's an attempt to use literature and art to show how important and valuable migration is, how the rights of migrants are important, how the experiences of migrants are amazing. So, you know, it's not easy for me to criticize this kind of work, but I have to say it is a very Anglo-centric book. It claims to be global, but instead it focuses for the most part on North America and the UK, which is problematic in itself. And then, you know, if you have 1/3 of the chapters devoted to the United States, then I think it's a legitimate question to ask, you know, where are the Italians? And it's not because of I have any, you know, nationalistic or patriotic tendency. In fact, I think sometimes the problem is that we leave that tendency to very conservative people.
Yeah.
For me, it's a legitimate question because I see that in Australia all the times when you see, you know, who gets the grants, who gets published. And yes, there are, you know, very brave publishers, there are very brave institutions, very brave academics, but overall it is apparent that it seems this very interesting history is not of interest for a lot of people on both sides of the political and cultural arena. And I think that's an issue that we need to address.
Well, amongst ourselves, first and foremost, and then you know, the other group I also noticed that was missing were the Chinese.
Well, yes, I mean, China was missing, but also essentially South America was
Yeah,
missing.
right.
And
Right.
so when you claim it's global, that's the kind of global that is global only from an American perspective, from an Anglo-centric perspective. You know, if you don't really, and also the other things is that it creates this illusion of periphery center migration, in which migration is always from, you know, the poor countries to the rich civilized Western countries. I think that's problematic too. We know that migration is much more complex and it is multi-directional, as the editor claimed. But if you want to edit a book that is global and multi-directional, then you can't really have 2/3 of the book on migration to English-speaking countries. It's in itself problematic, I think.
Yeah. I also agree totally with what you say about Italy and Italy today and how it treats its migrants. It's uh, I was so happy back in 1992, I mean 2002, to see Gian Antonio Stella's Lorda, Quando gli Albanesi eravamo noi. The funny thing, though, is that in 2002, the Albanese were already sort of, you know, integrated in some ways into Italian society. And it was then, of course, the Africans, both North and Sub-Saharan Africans, that were then starting to um, encompass the immigration experience in Italy. So and now there's a new. I think we can say there's a new generation of scholars who are looking at Italy through a post-colonial lens, and also some of the children of immigrants of African immigrants who are now doing some really good work. I don't know if you saw the book Future.
Yes.
What is it? Il domani raccontato dalle voci di oggi, which we presented at the Institute. And it was great to have the three, one came from California, one was a local who had sort of brought my attention brought the book to my attention. Candace Whitney, she's not in the book, but she lived in Italy and lives in New York. And then we had two people coming from Italy. And it was great. We had a wonderful evening with it. Those are the types of books. We need more of those, I think, in Italy, so that we can also have a better discussion between Italy and Australia, Italy and the United States, Italy and Canada, and so on, and Italy and Latin America, of course, and so on and so forth. Argentina, right? Argentina, Brazil, Chile. Those are the three major. Yeah.
I think so. I mean, the work of Ijaba Shego and many other writers and intellectuals have been, I think, very important. I think what the missing link is somehow the link with the Italian migration. So in all this post-colonial literature, you see that most of the references are to, the colonial past and the need to remember the colonial past, the colonies in Africa. But for instance, all the complicity of Italian migrants in the colonization of other countries, in settler colonialism in Brazil and Australia and the United States and so on, is often not connected. But you could say that had a huge impact as well, in those countries. It is, in a sense, a form of what you could call diaspora colonialism. And so I think we need to do more. And part of my work is around, the connections between Italians and indigenous people, but also the complicity of Italians in the genocide of indigenous people. I think we need to reconnect these different aspects, and contemporary migration also with, the history of Italian migration in a more complex and theoretical way. And there are books emerging in this space. I mean, the novel by Chiara Durastanti, for instance, or the work of Teresa Fiore and much more. But I think we need to do much more to connect, the colonial to the diaspora to the contemporary migration. And I think that's a very interesting space to explore.
Yeah, and I will say this: just so our viewers know, we had this a series of 3 conferences on 3 continents, and we started out in Australia in 2018, and we North Americans who were there were very impressed with this sensitivity toward the indigenous people that you all recognized overtly. I mean, it was clear that, there was a sensitivity on the part of those of you who were dealing with Italian diaspora and also the local issue of indigenous peoples, and a little bit, we've been awakened a little bit here in the United States 3 years ago with the Charlottesville, what happened in Charlottesville, and the president said there are good people on both sides, whatever. Of course, in New York, the left of center government, the left of center city council immediately decided that we had to look at quote unquote hate statues. And one of the statues was Columbus, Christopher Columbus. So the self-appointed spokespeople for the Italian Americans said, wait a second, and rose up in protest, and we're still having these conversations. We did a program in July with a couple of people, and then we just did one the other day that we'll post probably in the next week or so. And it's all Columbus, and what do we do with Columbus, and what does Columbus represent, and how can we keep, if you want to keep Columbus, then how do you keep them? And that's, yeah. So we're going through that a little bit, which is what you're talking about, this sense of, it's a type of recolonialization or reverse colonialization. Yeah. We have to talk to Paolo and company and have another conference and look at it from both sides now of the spectrum, not just from the point of us coming to or going to a place, but what did we do when we got there? Okay?
Okay, thank you,
okay,
Anthony.
Good. Okay.
Bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.